On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first man-made space satellite, Sputnik 1. This launch represented the beginning of a race between the Soviet Union and the United States over the control of space.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket.
The space race would lead to growing tensions between the two nations and would become a significant part of the Cold War. Shortly after, the Soviets launched another satellite named Sputnik 2. Both satellites were useless and transmitted no useful information back to Earth. The Russians did, however, openly broadcast Sputnik's transmission for the entire world to hear. While these beeps meant nothing, these satellites represented the fact that the Soviet Union could launch things into space, but the United States couldn't. Soon after, in January of 1958, the United States responded to the Sputnik satellites with the launch of Explorer 1.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire command. Fire command. Fuel tank pressurized. Launch tank pressurized. Missile power. Ignition. Space stage. Lift off. Lift off.
The liftoff was a success, but it seemed an eternity before the first signals arrived from space that the satellite had reached its orbit.
Hello, Lem. You can send this off to the secretary, that our satellite is definitely on orbit.
Following the Soviets' gains and recent American success, President Eisenhower established the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, in October of 1958, almost a year after the original launch of Sputnik 1. NASA's first project, Mercury, began in 1959 and had two main goals: putting a human in orbit around the Earth and doing it before the Soviet Union. In one aspect, Project Mercury proved to be a success. In May of 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space. Unfortunately, less than a month earlier, the Soviet Union managed to put Yuri Gagarin into space, making him the first human ever in space. Following another Soviet victory, NASA's funding increased by over 500% and at one point had almost 400,000 Americans working directly or non-directly on the lunar landing missions. Americans needed the sense that they could win this race, and in a speech in 1962, President JFK relayed this to them.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Following Kennedy's speech, NASA created Project Gemini, and later the Apollo program. Gemini's main goal was to develop space travel techniques that would help support the Apollo mission in reaching the moon.
Lost between the pioneering flights of Mercury and the lunar triumph of Apollo is the program that found the answers. It was called Gemini. Nearly forgotten today, Gemini was the essential step to the moon.
Gemini came along as kind of a step in the middle. As a matter of fact, we were doing Mercury, people began to work on Apollo, and then a number of people realized that there was a whole bunch of things that we could do in Earth orbit that we would like to do there before we ever went and tried them at the moon.
Using a sophisticated two-man capsule not much bigger than the old Mercury, Gemini will test rendezvous, long-duration flight, and spacewalking. All important, but none more critical than rendezvous.
Everything was based on doing a lunar orbit rendezvous. All the hardware was sized to do that. The performance of the command and service module, the lunar module, the Saturn V booster, was all based on the assumptions we could successfully do a lunar orbit rendezvous, except nobody had ever done one.
Following the success of the Gemini project, a lunar landing mission was now possible. From 1967 to May of 1969, 10 Apollo missions occurred to help prepare the mission of Apollo 11. The Apollo 11 crew consisted of astronauts Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong. Launched on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 hoped to fulfill Kennedy's goal of reaching the moon before the end of the decade. On July 20th, Aldrin and Armstrong became the first humans to land on the moon.
40 feet down, 2.5, picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down, straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. Down a half.
30 seconds.
Forward, just. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. APA at a descent. Mode control both auto, descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
6 hours after landing on the moon, on July 21st, Neil Armstrong became the first human to ever step foot on the moon, effectively ending the space race.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Columbia, this is Houston, AOS, over.
Houston, Columbia, on the high gate, over.
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. They're setting up the flag now. I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene.
That's all right, I don't mind a bit.
They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface.
Are you getting a TV picture now, Houston?
Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture. You're in our field of view now.
I'd like to evaluate the various paces that a person can traveling on the lunar surface. You do have to be. All right, you do have to be rather careful to keep track of where your center of mass is. Sometimes it takes about 2 or 3 paces to make.
The triumphant return of Apollo 11 on July 24th marked the ultimate humiliation for the Soviet space planners. Frustrated by one failure after another, the past 2 years have been marked by one misfortune after another. Nothing seemed to go right. It was a dramatic contrast to the early 1960s when the Americans could do no right and the Soviets could not go wrong.